Snow blanketed the earth, creating a frozen landscape of eerie desolation. It was January, and the frigid Alaskan wilderness promised a vacation unlike any we had ever taken. My family, Dad, Mom, my younger sister Kyle, and I had decided to spend a week in a secluded cabin deep in the woods. The allure of untouched nature, crackling fires, and crisp mountain air was too tempting to resist. We arrived late on the first night, headlights slicing through the thick snowfall as we pulled up to the wooden cabin. It was modest but charming, with smoke curling from its chimney and icicles clinging to the eaves. The drive had been exhausting, but once we unloaded our gear, lit a fire, and gathered around its warmth, the biting cold became almost comforting. The flames flickered, casting soft shadows on the walls, while the dense stillness of the forest pressed against the windows. Yet, inside, everything felt safe. The next morning, sunlight reflected off the pristine snow, almost blinding in its brilliance. After breakfast, we set out to explore the area, trekking through the towering evergreens that stood silent and heavy under their icy burden. The air was crisp, biting at our exposed skin, but the scenery was breathtaking. About halfway through our hike, we stumbled upon an old cabin nestled in a clearing. Its roof sagged under the weight of accumulated snow, and its windows were dark and clouded. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran down my spine. No smoke rose from the chimney, no signs of life stirred inside. Dad knocked on the door, no answer. "This place has been abandoned for years," he murmured, peering through the frost-covered window. Despite the bright morning, the cabin felt oppressively dark, as if it didn't belong to the world outside. Unsettled, we turned back and made our way to our own cabin, eager to shake off the unease. As evening fell, the Alaskan twilight painted the snow in hues of pink and violet. After dinner, we settled in with steaming mugs of coffee, the warmth of the fire warding off the growing chill. Drawn by the quiet beauty of the snowfall, I wandered to the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold air was sharp but refreshing. Then I saw him. At first, he was just a shadow among the trees, a man in dark clothing, barely visible against the swirling snow. My heart pounded as I squinted into the storm. Was he lost? Hurt? "Dad," I called, my voice trembling. "There's someone out there." Dad grabbed his coat and stepped outside, shielding his eyes against the wind. When he spotted the figure, he waved him over. The man moved hesitantly, his steps awkward, as though he was unused to walking in deep snow. "Come inside before you freeze to death," Dad said, pulling him into the warmth. He was gaunt, his cheeks hollow, his sunken eyes darting around the room nervously. His black coat was soaked, his beard crusted with ice. We sat him near the fire, where he shivered violently, his fingers trembling around the cup of hot tea Mom handed him. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse. I thought I was done for, out there. His name was Daniel. He had come to the area to stay alone in a cabin about a mile from ours. Earlier that day, while hiking, he had an unsettling feeling, like someone was following him. "At first, I thought it was just my imagination," he said, staring into the flames. "But then I saw him, a man dressed in black, standing in the trees. He didn't say anything. He just watched." A heavy silence settled over the room. I tried to shake him, but no matter which way I went, he followed. Then there were more. Two figures stepped out from the trees. I couldn't see their faces through the storm, but I knew they were looking at me. Daniel's hands trembled as he set his mug down. That's when I ran. The storm worsened, and I lost my way. Then I saw your lights. "Always practical," Dad reassured him. "You can stay the night. We'll help you find your cabin in the morning." At dawn, the storm had eased and we ventured out. Fresh snow covered the ground, except for the set of footprints leading to our porch. But there was something else. Another trail of prints veered off into the trees, circling the cabin like a predator stalking its prey. After an hour of searching, we found Daniel's cabin. It bore an uncanny resemblance to the abandoned one we had seen the day before. Eerily similar, yet unmistakably lived in. Daniel thanked us profusely, relief etched into his face, and we left him to settle back in. That night was our last in the cabin. Our vacation had taken a strange turn, and I was eager to leave. After dinner, we gathered around the fire, our conversations light and filled with nervous laughter. By 1 a.m., we all decided to head to bed. I had just pulled my blanket over me when I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock at the front door. My heart leaped into my throat. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but then it came again. Then it came again. A slow, measured knocking. I wasn't the only one who heard it. Within moments, we were all huddled in the living room, staring at the door. "Don't open it," Dad whispered, his voice firm. He reached for the handgun he always carried for emergencies. "Go away," he barked. "I have a gun, and I'll use it." The knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, like more than one person was on the other side. And then, the whispers. Low, unintelligible murmurs, unmistakably human, yet chillingly foreign. Finally, Dad had enough. He flung the door open and fired 2 shots into the night. The sound was deafening in the stillness. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the whispers returned, closer, this time. The rest of the night was a blur of fear. We remained huddled together in the living room, Dad's gun resting in his lap, waiting for dawn. No more knocks came. But none of us could shake the feeling that we were being watched. At first light, we packed up and left. The once enchanting snow now felt suffocating, pressing down on us as we drove away. I glanced back at the cabin one last time, half expecting to see figures standing in the trees. But there was nothing, just the snow and the silence. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. The end of the year is always a hectic time for anyone running a business, but when you're leading a company that manufactures and sells products on Amazon, it's absolute chaos. With dozens of employees to oversee and an endless to-do list, I barely had a moment to myself during the final stretch of December. Normally, I'd be home by 5 p.m., but on the night of December 31st, I stayed late to close the books for the year. By the time I locked up my office and stepped outside, it was already past 1 a.m. The wind howled through the streets, and the snowstorm that had been brewing all evening was now in full force. The roads were nearly deserted, save for the occasional car cautiously navigating through the white abyss. As I drove slowly, my headlights cut through the snow, revealing a desolate road ahead. That's when I saw him, a man lying motionless in the snow just off to the side of the road. My first instinct was hesitation. Stopping in the middle of a snowstorm to help a stranger could be dangerous. What if it was a trap? But then I thought about the conditions. He wouldn't survive out here much longer. I couldn't just drive past and leave him to die. I pulled over and rushed to his side. He was barely conscious, his face pale and lips blue. His clothes were tattered, offering little protection from the bitter cold. I struggled to lift him into my car and immediately cranked up the heat as I sped toward the nearest hospital. The doctors told me he was hypothermic and severely malnourished, but with treatment, he would make a full recovery. I visited him every day during his recovery, curious about who he was and how he ended up in such a dire situation. When he finally regained enough strength to talk, his story unfolded like a tragedy. His name was Ali. 2 years ago, his life had crumbled after the death of his young son. The grief tore his family apart, and he lost his job shortly after. With nowhere to go, he ended up on the streets, surviving day by day, until he couldn't anymore. That night, I decided it was better to let the storm take me, he said, his voice trembling. But you saved me. His words stayed with me. I couldn't get them out of my head. I lived alone in a big house, and I figured maybe I could give him a fresh start. So I offered to let him stay with me for a while. At first he hesitated, but with some encouragement, he accepted. Having Allie around wasn't as awkward as I thought it might be. He was quiet, kept the house tidy, and seemed genuinely grateful. Over the weeks, we talked more, and I started to see the person behind the hardships. He was intelligent, kind, and willing to work hard to get back on his feet. One snowy evening, I came home after a particularly long day at work. The front door was wide open. My heart sank. I rushed inside, expecting the worst. The house was eerily quiet, and nothing seemed out of place at first glance. I immediately thought Ali had taken advantage of my kindness and stolen something valuable. But as I checked room after room, I found everything exactly where it should be, relief mixed with confusion. If nothing was missing, then where was Ali? Just as I was about to call him, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find him standing there, panting and visibly shaken. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his breath visible in the cold night air. Ali explained that he had been asleep upstairs when he heard noises coming from downstairs. At first he thought I had come home early, but when he heard glass shattering, he realized something was wrong. I crept downstairs and saw two men in masks rummaging through the living room, he said. My blood ran cold as he continued. "I remembered you kept a gun in the cabinet, so I grabbed it and yelled at them to leave. They panicked and ran out the door, jumping into a van parked down the street. I tried to chase them, but they were gone before I could get a license plate." The idea of strangers breaking into my home was terrifying, but knowing Ali had been there to scare them off was a relief. "I'm sorry about the door," he added, looking genuinely apologetic. "I couldn't leave it open while I chased them." That night, I realized just how much Ali had changed. He wasn't just some homeless man I'd picked up off the street. He had integrity, courage, and a strong sense of right and wrong. The next day, I sat him down and offered him a job at my company. At first, he was hesitant, saying he didn't want to take advantage of my kindness, but I insisted. I told him this was his chance to rebuild his life. He started in a small role, handling inventory and assisting with deliveries, but it didn't take long for his natural skills and work ethic to shine. Within a year, he had worked his way up to manager, overseeing a team of employees with precision and care. Looking back, that snowy night changed both of our lives. For Ali, it was a second chance to build something meaningful. For me, it was a lesson in empathy and the unexpected rewards of helping someone in need. Ali still works at my company, and he is one of the most trusted people on my team. Every New Year's Eve, we make it a point to celebrate together, a reminder of how far we've both come since that fateful night in the storm. I always thought winter was peaceful, the kind of quiet you don't get in the summer when everything buzzes with life. Snow muffles sound. It turns the world soft and slow. That's why I agreed to house sit for my uncle in the mountains. It was supposed to be peaceful. It wasn't. The storm started in the afternoon, just as the sun dipped behind the mountains. At first, it was nice, light flakes drifting lazily through the air. I stood by the window, sipping coffee, watching the snow settle over the ground like a fresh coat of paint. The world outside was white and pristine, perfect in a way only winter can make it. By 6, the wind had picked up. The flakes no longer drifted. They slammed against the window in angry bursts. The old wooden cabin groaned as the wind howled through its cracks. It was loud, almost like something alive was outside, clawing to get in. Uncle Greg's cabin was small. Cozy, he called it, though it felt cramped to me. It had one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with a stone fireplace that hadn't been used in years. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with dusty paperbacks and strange knickknacks, wooden animal carvings, rusty tools, jars of things I didn't want to think about. I lit a fire, more for comfort than warmth. Uncle Greg had warned me not to rely on it. "Chimney hasn't been cleaned in years," he said over the phone. "Might as well burn the place down." By 8, the storm was in full swing. The windows rattled. The wind screamed like a wounded animal. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Only the fire remained, casting flickering shadows along the walls. That's when I heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind, a low, keening sound, barely audible over the storm, but then it came again. Closer, clearer. Help me. I froze. The voice was faint but distinct. It cut through the storm like a knife. Help me, please. It was coming from outside. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put. The storm was brutal. Going out in it meant risking getting lost, freezing to death before I could find my way back. But the voice, it sounded desperate, like whoever it belonged to was barely holding on. I grabbed a flashlight, pulled on my coat and boots, and opened the door. The wind slammed into me, nearly knocking me off my feet. Snow whipped around me, a blinding white wall that swallowed everything beyond a few feet. "Hello?" I called. My voice was lost in the storm. "Over here," the voice answered, faint but clear. I stumbled forward, one hand clutching the flashlight, the other shielding my face from the wind. The cold clawed at my skin, seeped into my bones. The voice led me into the woods behind the cabin, where trees loomed like shadowy giants, their branches heavy with snow. "Where are you?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Here. Closer, now, just ahead." I pushed forward. The snow dragged at my boots like quicksand. Then suddenly, the ground vanished beneath me. I fell. The world tilted as I tumbled down a steep slope hidden beneath the snow. I landed hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Gasping, I stared up at the swirling snowflakes. Then, I saw it. At first, I thought it was a person, a figure crouched in the snow, its back to me. But it was too thin, its limbs were too long, spindly. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and it was naked despite the cold. "Hello?" I whispered. The figure turned, its movements jerky, unnatural. Its face was wrong, features stretched and distorted, as if someone had tried to mold a human face out of clay and failed. Its eyes were too big, black, and empty. Its mouth, a gaping hole lined with jagged teeth. "Help me," it said. The voice was no longer faint. It was loud now, echoing in my head, drowning out the storm. "Help me!" I scrambled backward, hands clawing at the snow, my heart hammered in my chest. The thing tilted its head, watching me with those empty black eyes. Then, it moved. It crawled toward me, its movements inhuman, spider-like. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My flashlight slipped from my hand, its beam slicing through the darkness. The thing was almost on me, its long, bony fingers reaching out. I grabbed a rock, half buried in the snow, and swung it with all my strength. The impact jarred my arm. The thing let out a shriek, a high-pitched, inhuman sound that made my ears ring. It recoiled, giving me just enough time to scramble to my feet. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I couldn't see through the snow, couldn't hear over the wind. But I ran anyway. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air. Somehow, I made it back to the cabin. I slammed the door behind me, locking it, shoving a chair under the handle for good measure. The storm raged outside, but the cabin was silent. I stood there, shaking, staring at the door, half expecting it to burst open, but nothing came. The thing was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, clutching the flashlight, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin. When morning came, the storm had passed. The world outside was still, covered in a perfect, untouched layer of snow. No footprints, no sign of a struggle, like nothing had ever happened.